So SCHD for a really long time was kind of referred to as the Dividend ETF King, or the perfect ETF to set you up for retirement. And that can still be considered true, but recently there's been some massive underperformance when comparing it to the S&P 500. When looking at the charts, the S&P 500 has a one-year total return of over 28%. So that's as of January 2024, with SCHD having a one-year return of about 12%, and that's including dividends reinvested. And I know it's not always super effective to compare returns, especially in the short term, but this has been a trend now for almost 2 years. SCHD has also dropped pretty significantly over the past 6 weeks or so, now down nearly 8% from its 52-week high. So the question is whether or not SCHD is really that amazing of an investment, or at least as good as an investment as others claim that it is. Now, before I get attacked by an angry SCHD mob, I really just want to talk about why there's been so much underperformance when comparing it to an S&P 500 ETF like VOO or SPY. Now, there's a few different reasons for this, but to me, they all kind of tie in together anyway. If you look at the S&P 500 ETFs, they're all very heavily weighted toward the Mag 7 stocks that are all technology companies. VOO has a 33% weighting in the technology sector, with its top holdings being Apple, Nvidia, and Meta, which have just all absolutely exploded over the past 2 years now. So ETFs like VOO are really just turning into typical high growth ETFs that are very heavily concentrated on the technology sector. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but sector allocation is huge when it comes to overall performance, especially when we're in a more bullish market like we've been in for the past 2 and now almost 3 years. Another huge factor too is interest rates, and we recently learned that even though they aren't going to be very drastic, there will still be interest rate cuts throughout 2025. And as we know, as interest rates go a little bit lower, there tends to be more of a shift towards tech and growth companies. And that's because as interest rates come down, the cost of capital, or the cost of borrowing, is much cheaper, making it a little bit easier for these growth companies to scale and increase their margins. And as for SCHD, it doesn't hold nearly as many high growth or technology companies, and a lot of the companies in the portfolio are a lot more mature and aren't as reliant on long-term debt and lower interest rates, which is also why they're able to pay much higher dividends. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that SCHD is not a growth ETF. It is solely focused on dividend income and dividend growth and holds value stocks rather than growth stocks in its portfolio. So there are going to be many months and many years, especially when we're in a bull market, where SCHD underperforms the S&P 500. And don't get me wrong, a 12% return is still really good, especially if you don't mind a little bit of growth and are more focused on getting that 3 to 3.5% dividend. And you also might be thinking, well, it's not all about just growth and growing your portfolio. Income is really important too. But I will say that even if you are focused on income, I do still think there are a few income ETFs out there that are just a little bit better than SCHD. For example, JEPQ, that tracks the returns of the NASDAQ and is currently paying a 9.5% dividend paid out monthly, has a 2-year total return, so including dividends, of over 72%, whereas SCHD has a total return of just over 17%. Now, of course, these ETFs are not at all the same, but JEPQ is still a monthly income ETF that's been paying out monthly dividends since its inception back in 2022, and still experiences consistent growth, not including dividends. So all in all, SCHD is still a very solid dividend ETF that will yield extremely consistent returns, especially if you are reinvesting the dividends. But for me personally, since I'm more than 10 years away from retiring, an ETF like SCHD is just not one that I think is worth owning in my own portfolio. And that's because there are other ETFs out there that produce returns that are more catered to my investing style. And I do think dividends are great. I still probably make $2,000 or $3,000 a year from dividends in my own portfolio, but I just don't need the income right now, and I won't need it for about 30 more years. So let me know what you guys think of SCHD in the comments below, and whether or not you are holding onto it in your portfolio for the long term, and I will see you all next time.